Thank you very much. First, I want to thank His Highness Sheikh Mohammed for his friendship, his hospitality, and his wise leadership in this region at a time when we need it more all over the world. I want to thank Sonny Varkey and GEMS Education and the Varkey GEMS Foundation, their co-sponsors, UNESCO, and the Global Education Initiative of the Secretary General, the UAE Ministry of Education, and Dubai Cares, and all those who sponsored this conference. I'm very grateful to be the honorary chair of the GEMS Education Foundation, and I am particularly proud of the work they have done in teacher training and with the Global Teacher Status Index and the coming Teachers Prize being inaugurated this year. The goals of this conference to elevate education as a global concern on a par with health, poverty, and climate change, and to achieve not just universal enrollment, but profound positive changes in the way young people are taught, are laudable and critical. The need is great. After all, there are still 100 million children who never go to school, and at least 200 million more who go, but go to schools without trained teachers or adequate learning materials. Young people with little or no education are twice as likely to come down with HIV/AIDS in the countries where that's a problem, something I've worked with every day. Young people who have education are far more likely to grow up to earn greater incomes, resist conflict, and support democracy. One of the things that I hope will come out of this conference, which, as I just told Sheikh Mohammed, is amazing, is that the quality of people, including several people who were heads of state or government when I was President of the United States, who are here, educators and leaders of non-governmental groups. My friend and neighbor, Jeffrey Canada from the Harlem Children's Zone, whom I'm sure will make a great contribution here. One thing I hope that will come out of this is that there will be a greater level of cooperation between the education sector, public and private, with businesses and non-governmental organizations, for reasons that I will attempt to outline in my brief remarks. In a recent global survey of more than 1,000 chief executive officers, almost 30% of them said that constraints on available talent in the areas they were interested in investing in prevented them from pursuing their opportunities. Similar studies have found that each dollar invested in education provides $53 in benefits to an employer at the very start of a person's working life. There is a great deal of education and training today being done by businesses and NGOs along with educational institutions. We don't normally think of it that way, but I think we should in attempting to develop genuine coordination within countries and within regions. Individual quality education is still profoundly important to get young people off to a good start in life. The problems, of course, are quite different in poor countries, rising economies, and developed ones. But the interesting thing is how many countries in each category are facing major education challenges today. In poor countries, often the most important thing is simply to build a system that can accommodate all the children who need to be educated. In our hemisphere, where I live, the poorest country is Haiti. Before the earthquake, 80% of the children never finished even 6 years of school. Almost everybody was required to pay school fees, as they are in many poor countries in Africa, and they didn't have the money to do so. One horrible consequence in Haiti is that it has the hemisphere's largest number of children, in effect, sold into indentured servitude, into a form of child bondage called the Restavek system. And typically what happens is a poor family will have, let's say, 4 children, and they will sell their children's labor to another family, sometimes for as little as $40, just to have one less person to feed at home and to use the money that is left to pay school fees for the 3 kids who are left at home. It is a horrible tragedy. The current government there is committed to universal free public education. It is making real progress. We have well over half the children in school in Haiti now for the first time ever. And when they're all in school, 90% of the Restavek system will disappear. It is simply a public tragedy of economic distress and the lack of affordable, available educational opportunity. In Uganda, where the GEMS Foundation's done a lot of work on teacher training and plans to do much more, you have the second largest average family size in the world. The average Ugandan family has 7 children. There is a crying problem there with the government just to have enough money to provide schools and any teachers in the schools. So this training initiative is important. One of the participants in this conference, George Sroor, started something called the Building Tomorrow Schools. And I hope all of you get a chance to meet him. He's been a popular partner in our Clinton Global Initiative. He started this work in his mid-20s as a result of an experience he had in Uganda. And he basically made a deal with the government that he would go into these communities that had no schools, work with the local communities, and let them design and build the schools with their help, that they would pay for them if in turn the government would send truly qualified teachers. I actually have been in one of those schools in the last 3 years, and 2 of the teachers I saw teaching children, I would have been thrilled to have as my own daughter's teachers. There are things that we can all do to make a real difference here. And I was going to wait till the end to say this, but this makes a point that I think is really important. So much needs to be done. No one and no single government can do it all, even no international institution can. Given the financial constraints on donors everywhere, the ideal solution for every country that ought to be enacted and developed locally and then implemented and financed by somebody somewhere else is not going to happen overnight. That cannot be an excuse not to do what we know works if we have the ability to do it anywhere. And whether you look at what the Varkey Foundation has done or what Building Tomorrow has done or the Harlem Children's Zone or any number of the other gifted programs that will be presented here, I think the important lesson is that we can all do something, and we should. Among the things that I think we need still special attention on is equal educational opportunities for girls. It's one of the most cost-effective ways to spur development. When young women have education, they marry later, have fewer children, get better prenatal care, and their children have higher survival rates, better health and nutrition, and they themselves are more likely to attend school and to succeed there. Every effort being made to equalize educational opportunity, therefore, is worthy of our support. There are also other specific populations that need to be included in parts of the world where they aren't. The disabled, the immigrant, and the refugees. We were talking just before we came in here about the huge number of refugees from Syria in Lebanon and in Jordan. They're also in Turkey and elsewhere that are still growing. The children are, they're still living. They have to have access to education. And that is something the international community ought to address. I believe that technology does have a role to play in universalizing quality education, but we haven't worked out exactly how to do it yet. The One Laptop for Child initiative is exciting, but there are too many children who don't have a laptop and won't have one soon, or they don't have a real connection to the internet that will give them access to all the knowledge you find there. On the other hand, I think it's worth continuing to develop that. In rising economies like China, India, Brazil, Mexico, they have a lot of poor kids they still are trying to reach, but they're doing some exciting things. In Brazil, where our foundation does a lot of work, they've achieved virtually universal enrollment in primary schools by paying the mothers of the poorest children to get their kids in school and go to the doctor at least once a year. And the results have been truly astonishing. Mexico has a similar program. Last year, Mexico, having established 140 tuition-free universities, graduated 113,000 engineers. They are 1/2 the population of the United States. We graduated 120,000. It is not surprising that after years of Latin America being the place with the most unequal distribution of income on earth, in the last decade, while America was growing more unequal, inequality actually declined in Brazil and Mexico, in no small measure because of a commitment to education beginning at the beginning and running through the university years. I wanted to say just a word, if I could, about developed countries because they make the point, the challenges we're facing, for example, in the United States with a lot of immigrants and a lot of low-income people and an enormous percentage of our kids growing up with only one parent who goes off to work, often for a very meager income, is to reform our systems to work for them. If you learned about the Harlem Children's Zone here, which is where I have my office, they try to deal with the whole environment and recognize that children live in hours they're not in school. If you listen to some of the other people who are here, they will tell you about other things they do. But I think the most important thing is that we know, in spite of all the problems anywhere, the most important difference maker is a good teacher. We had a study released in the United States just in the last year that said that having one good teacher for 1 year could have a dramatic positive impact on the earning capacity of a student for a lifetime. Therefore, I like to Teach for America program in America because they recruit the best and brightest young people. I know because Not all the young people I've recommended to Wendy Kopp have even been accepted in Teach America for America, because all of our bright kids want to go into it. And some stay for a career, some stay for a few years, but it makes the point every country needs to find a way to do that. Probably the most consistently high-performing European system over the last decade has been Finland. And whenever I say that in America, people roll their eyes and they say, well, what do you expect? It's one of those little northern European countries where they only have 5 million people and everybody's smart to begin with. Finland has students from 45 different national and ethnic groups. It has an increasingly diverse population. You cannot become a teacher in Finland unless you graduated in the top 10% of your university class. And they rigorously emphasize that. But perhaps the best example is in Shanghai, which regularly scores at the top of all international comparative tests. And I read a fascinating interview a few weeks ago with the man who's in charge of running the school system in Shanghai. He was remarkably humble. He said, you know, we did this with a very simple strategy. 10 years ago, we had an average school district. We weren't doing particularly well. But we had some great schools and some great teachers. So the first thing we did was to organize more time for the teachers to help each other, to train each other, which is one of the things behind the Varkey initiative, the training initiative that I like a lot. And he said the goal was to make sure that all of our average teachers became good teachers. Once we achieved that goal, we then took our best teachers and sent them into the schools with the largest number of problems. Within 3 years after that, we were at the top of the world in all these comparative tests. Now, the thing I want to emphasize there is, it sounds simple, but to do that, you have to want to replicate excellence. When I was a young governor of my state, we were the second poorest state in the country. And I served for 12 years, and when I left to become president, a big international survey said that we were one of the 2 states that made more progress than any other states in the U.S. in our schools. But I left feeling that I had failed somehow because I could never devise a system where everybody was committed to replicating excellence. And I hope there will be some talk about that today, because that's essentially what the Chinese did, in a different way what the Finns and many others have done, that I think is worth devoting a lot of time and attention to. One final point that I'd like to make about education, at least I see this in the United States and I think more elsewhere. We, all of us, have to find a way to merge basic academics with learning for life so that people are more able to make an effective living. And one of my favorite partners at home is a school in New York City, where my foundation is, called the Harbor School. It is almost 100% low-income kids. Most of them couldn't swim when they enrolled in this school. And it's a school that specializes in marine sciences. You can learn aquaculture there. You can learn how to be a deep sea diver there. The school's major social project is planting 30 million oysters in New York Harbor around the Statue of Liberty to take the nitrogen out of the water and purify it again. Here is the point. Every person who graduates from the school has enough academic credits to get into a four-year university, but enough practical training in one of 5 different marine sciences to get a job the day they walk out of school. And again, I will say, I think that one of the things we need to do is to think more, particularly in poorer countries, developing countries, about how we can merge the education and training now being done by business and NGOs with the work that the education system itself has to do. I was thinking about it the other day. I was just reading. Every week I get a report on the activities of my foundation in all the countries we work in. And so I got up early this morning and I started reading this report, and I got to thinking about how many of our economic projects, our agricultural projects, our entrepreneurial projects, our healthcare projects were in effect education projects. And I believe if there were more of an effort to harmonize these things while having good basic education in every country in the early years, that we could take more limited dollars and make them go further and have greater impact. And we could use a lot of the projects. Just coming here made me think about all the things that we ought to be volunteering to do in countries in education and training that we're not. But I'll give you 2 examples from Malawi, a relatively low-income country in Africa. We have a big climate change project in Malawi that essentially is part of the global effort to encourage people in low-income places to plant more trees and then get them cash for doing that, to pay them to reforest the land and absorb more greenhouse gases. So we hired a young person to run this in his early 20s, and he said that he would only run our project if he could go to all these rural villages which had no schools and spend a day in each village educating people about climate change. So I asked the young man what he learned. He said they already knew all about it. They just didn't know what was causing it. But they were living there. So he said, I felt that I was teaching school so that they understood why all these changes in the climate were occurring. They also turned out to be very smart people, these people with no education. They said all they wanted was 55% of the cash they were getting, and they put the other 45% away to include other villages in the program so they too would learn about climate change and they too could help to solve the problem. That was an educational program. We have an agricultural program there which involves one big anchor farm, which is 100 to 200 hectares, all the ones we have, each one serving about 21,000 farmers. We teach them how, for example, to plant and preserve topsoil in drought, as well as buying them better seed and fertilizer and taking their crops to market for them, storing them where necessary. In the first year, these 21,000 farmers averaged a 567% increase in their incomes. 567%. They almost tripled their output. The rest was cutting the cost of their inputs and increasing the efficiency of the supply chain. Why am I saying this? Because these people were so hungry to learn. Most of these farmers farmed only 1 acre with 1 hoe. But I realized we were running an education program. So that's the last point I want to make. I think that all of you who are in education as a life passion can get more partners, more investors, and more harmonized efforts from the private sector and from the NGOs than we are now getting. Yes, it would be wonderful if the donors of the world had a fund and immediately provided universal education and high-quality, well-trained teachers and good schools next week. In the meanwhile, we need to maximize the opportunities that are before us. The most encouraging thing I can say is intelligence is evenly distributed. The willingness to work is evenly distributed. And the desperate hunger to learn is evenly distributed. Organization and opportunity are not. And finally, I have concluded after 40 years of trying to do something about this in one stage or another in my life, that still the teachers matter most. Thank you very much.